This is the Leadership Podcast, and we study leaders. This is episode 464, featuring Sabina Nawaz, author of You're the Boss, Become the Manager You Want to Be and Others Need. And also, she is a global C-suite coach. Thank you for joining us today. This is Jim Vasilopoulos, founder of Rafty Advisors, and this is the Leadership Podcast.
Hey, everybody. Jan Rutherford, founder of Self-Reliant Leadership. Thanks for making us a part of your day as we study leaders. And you know where to find our past catalog on all those great episodes. It's at theleadershippodcast.com.
And this episode is brought to you by Darley. Darley's mission supports all our military and first responders with the equipment they need to ensure mission success, whether that's a water pump, a drone, or emergency medical supplies. Learn more about this fantastic company and the people supporting our nation's heroes at darley.com. That's DARLEY.com. Darley, you serve others, we serve you.
So our guest today is Sabina Nawaz, and she is an elite executive coach who advises C-level executives and teams at Fortune 500 companies, government agencies, nonprofit, and academic institutions around the world. And she's also the author of You're the Boss, Become the Manager You Want to Be and Others Need. And Sabina, really cool endorsement from Kim Scott, who everybody knows wrote Radical Candor. And she says, offers practical strategies to make sure that you can be both good and great. And I cannot tell you how many people we coach that say, can I be good and great? So welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Jim and Jan. It's great to be here. Thank you for reading the book and having me on your show.
You're welcome. And again, as we talked about before we hit the record button, you're friends with Cheryl Tellis, who's a dear friend of ours and somebody that we just adore. So we always ask our guests, and you're pretty public out there on social. What can't we find out about you on social? What is it that's not in the public bio?
Oh, gosh. Well, you won't find out that I am trained in stunt fighting.
In stunt fighting?
Yeah. I took theater classes while I was at Microsoft and then started my own theater company. And as part of so the theater company was just a small community theater, but we often had a healthy dose of training thrown in there, not just shows. And we got a series of training steps in stunt fighting as part of being the theater company. And I was just a few steps short of getting certified when I got pregnant and decided that stunt fighting might not be the wisest thing to do in that physical condition.
Yeah. Oh, my gosh. We have had so many guests that are into acting, improv, dancing, music. There is a correlation between people that are successful and people that appreciate and know something about the arts, for sure.
Absolutely. My bachelor's degree, even though my major was computer science, was a liberal arts education at Smith College. And I think that everybody should have a liberal arts education. It is so foundational to success in life and also in terms of leadership skills.
Yeah, that's awesome. Hey, before we jump in, just real quick, I have a cousin and his son are both stunt drivers and stunt men in Hollywood.
Oh, wow.
So it's kind of cool to get their perspective on things. It's a lot of sitting around time,
Of course.
what I hear.
Yeah.
But anyway, well, we're excited to kind of dig into this. Your website headline is Grow Through Pressure. And anyone that's listening to this show knows we love talking about adversity and crucibles. I'm interested, what pressure did you experience that provided the most growth in your stellar career?
Well, because the career wasn't stellar all the time. Like every career, it had its ups and downs. And I, at one point, was a really lousy manager at Microsoft. It didn't start out that way. For the first decade or so of management, most of the people on my teams would say, you're the best manager I've had. I cared for people. I coached them. Those were great years.
Yeah.
And then everything changed. This was the first day I'm coming back from parental leave, putting on lipstick for the first time in 5 months. And my assistant, Lori, calls me frantic. Where are you? Steve expects you in 30 minutes. And Lori's reading me the memo I'm supposed to discuss with Steve Ballmer, the CEO of Microsoft, as I hit warp speed. And that set the pace and tone for when I got back to work, Jan.
Yeah.
Box overflowing, calendar full, infant at home, no peace, no sleep, no patience. And so in overnight, I morphed from caring and nurturing to snippy and short. Still 5'3" short, but also short-tempered. And I started micromanaging. When people would come to my office, I'd just keep all 10 fingers on the keyboard and look over my shoulder, signaling, you're less important than me. I'm super busy. Spit it out, move on. The worst part was I thought I was doing a good job. I was killing it. I was being efficient until a colleague of mine tells me, Zach is crying in his office because of something you said. My entire body turns hot with shame. And I realize that I have become that boss that people apparently fear and really don't like. And that got me to the realization that it is not power that corrupts, it is pressure that corrupts us.
Oh, that's interesting.
Power comes in and isolates us. So pressure is this silent corruptor, and power is this great divider. It creates a rift, especially with the boss who's acting out. Who's going to tell them, boss, your behavior is not great? So we are the last ones to find out.
Yeah. There's a saying, your body keeps score.
Yes.
Well, I'm wondering, for all the people out there that are really busy, which is everybody, and overwhelmed, what would you want to say to those people that are all, well, it's going to get better, and at the end of the quarter, it's going to get better, when I go on vacation, what do you say to all those people? Because obviously you do know that the body keeps score.
Yes, the body does keep score. And in fact, in my case, I paid a fairly high price. After doing that kind of pace for a while, I got slammed with vertigo and I could not move. I couldn't even open my eyes without throwing up.
Wow.
And I wouldn't learn. I'd get the vertigo episode. It would be miserable. Then I'd be fine. And I'd go back to my old ways and then come back. And again, whammo, I'm getting hit by vertigo again until my son hammered it into my head like, Mom, you need to take your meds and get to bed before this happens. Stop being in denial. What I tell people as they confront a lot of pressure is our default reaction to pressure is to hunker down and do more.
Yeah.
Busier, but you know what? The 24-hour clock timer is going to ding at some point. So nobody can go, at least so far, nobody has discovered how to surpass that clock. Instead of doing more, the thing that works the best is to do nothing. Nothing. This is a practice I call blank space, where most of the clients I coach take 2 hours back to back in a week and they unplug. Step away from the machinery, online, no conversations, no reading, no researching, because we know that goes into the rabbit hole of TikTok or YouTube or whatever. And they just step back and be. Now, that's really difficult for people to do, and there are ways to put it into smaller, shorter chunks, easier ways to go about it, but it's to do nothing.
You mentioned a couple things I kind of want to tie together perhaps in a question and kind of dig into. We're at this stage where there are a lot of, at least the millennials that I know, a lot of them having kids right now. And so they're at that point where they're just like having their kids and starting their lives. And at that point that you were at in your career where you were like, okay, coming back, but you're like super tired, super stressed. And, one of the things you kind of lost maybe was a little bit of your patience. And you leaned in a little bit more heavy on your kind of authority, and your aggressiveness, perhaps.
Yes.
Which I think is, totally normal. I get it. I think we've all probably been there. What suggestions do you have for people that are at that whatever point in their career where they're kind of stressed, they're defaulting into that, like maybe leaning a bit too heavy on power and finding that balance point that's like, hey, I need to leverage my authority and assert myself. the same time, I need to be patient. And there's like that balance point. What advice do you have for people to try and find that right balance point of power and authority with patience and empathy?
Mm, mm. Such an important question. And I'm sure you see this with your clients. There isn't a client who doesn't work on this in both directions. Either they've shown so much empathy that people abuse their position and don't respect the office in the way it should be, or where they've brought out the stick a little bit too much and really need to dial it down. Because I didn't just lose my patience. Let's be honest, I lost my humanity.
Mm.
I did not treat people as human beings in that thankfully brief stint. For most of my management, it went well, but I was not doing a good job. And so the important thing here is to think about the fact that there are many ways to skin the cat. There are many ways to get something right and to accomplish something. I am in a process right now where I'm interviewing a dozen people who work for this incredibly smart person. Now, I don't know about you, but have you ever had a client who's not called incredibly smart? They're all supposed very, very smart. Well, apparently this guy is off the chart smart. They're like, we've never seen somebody like this person. They're going to win the next equivalent of Nobel Prize for their field, kind of smart. And so he obviously sees things a lot faster than other people. And he jumps the gun, and people just shut down. He tells them exactly how it should be done. He tells them what's wrong, and he snows them with evidence and data and logic, and he's rarely wrong. So here's the thing. He's not wrong. And is he being efficient? Yes. But what is he also doing? He's increasing the pressure on himself because now suddenly he's the hardest working person in the room. And nobody else has the energy to. They're like, well, he's just going to shut us down, so why bother? Or it's just exhausting to put forth the argument, so I'm going to choose my battles. And sometimes that's wise to choose your battles, but other times he's losing the benefit of multiple perspectives. So in his case, and people like his case, what I often ask people to do, especially the more authority you have, is to exercise something called your shut up muscle, which is to not be the first, second, maybe the third, fourth, or fifth person to speak. Let others speak first, because the minute you speak, no one else is going to debate that. Yes, boss, that's a great idea. If you're looking for reassurance and that's the only place in your life you can find it, go do it. But how's that working for you in terms of being innovative, in terms of expanding things, in terms of reducing pressure on you? So in You're the Boss, there are 4 steps to exercising your shut up muscle. One of them being, be the third person to speak. So some of these things don't have to be a big effort, but they require some self-management.
Yeah. It's great advice. And it just, the problem, I think, was maybe, it's always been there. There've always been people like that. But I think in the book, Good to Great, there's, I think, the idea of the genius with 1,000 followers or something like that, which it's very familiar these days, this kind of problem. But, not too many people offer kind of practical solutions. And so I really appreciate that about your book. It puts out there like, and the shut up muscle is like, that's memorable. I really like that.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks, Joe.
Well, Sabina, what we're really talking about here is self-awareness. I mean, in every really great executive I have the privilege of working with is working on their self-awareness every single day. It plays a role in leadership resilience, especially during, as we were speaking earlier, about uncertainty and change. How do you suggest that we continually improve our self-awareness, that we don't always need intermediaries like a 360 to improve our self-awareness?
Mm-hmm. I have a few thoughts here. One is to never call yourself self-aware. I have a red flag when I have an exploratory conversation with a prospective client and they say, I'm very self-aware. And I think, you just don't know what you don't know. And it's harder than to push past that, the image you've created of I'm self-aware, to actually raise your awareness. So self-awareness is an never-ending quest. And every 360, that is the interview process I conduct to get feedback on the executive, every single executive is surprised and often shocked by what they find out.
Yeah.
So clearly, and many of them have a high degree of self-awareness. So that's one piece.
Yeah.
The second piece to raising your self-awareness is to not believe the people who work for you, because they're going to see power, authority, it distorts. It's like a broken volume knob.
Mm.
Everything you say comes across at a higher amplitude. It's more dire, it's more urgent, and it's directed directly at me, the direct report, where I'm going, oh, I better have said goodbye to my office plants because my boss said, can you stop by for a chat? Something as benign as that. And on the other hand, everything an employee says is a lot milder. It's muted than what they're really experiencing. So when an employee says everything is fine, what they mean is I've started a secret group chat about your management style. And if you say, oh, I'm really self-aware because I thought this was great and so did my employees, you're not likely on the mark.
Yeah.
One way to think about, so now to go back, Jim, to your point of practical ways to think about this, would be to ask yourself a few questions. For example, and these questions would be not about what you're doing, but about the reaction that it's eliciting. Do people come up with their own ideas? Do people argue with you? If they don't, there's a power gap there that they're too intimidated to cross. How are people asking you veiled questions? Like, do you think it would be a good idea to? In other words, you better do this, you're really screwing up, but that's not what they're going to say. So if they ask you these sort of veiled questions all the time, that's another sign to raise your awareness that something else might be going on.
Yeah. I like that one about do people argue with you? I really like that. I remember more than a few times, seeing the CEO get up in the town hall and say, hey, that was great. There was no questions. Like, that was terrible that there's no questions. But I wanted to say something else when you said if somebody says they're self-aware, they're not. To me, the clue is when somebody says, I'm really selfless. All I care about is everybody else. I mean, that usually is a giveaway that it's probably the opposite. So, yeah.
Yeah, and Jan, if these positions require a lot of stamina, a lot of thick skin, a lot of perseverance. If you truly are totally not about yourself, totally egoless, that's great to be in an ashram. It's not great in a CEO's seat,
Yeah.
because you need some amount of confidence and sense of self. Now, there are plenty of CEOs who have raging imposter syndrome, but you need at least some amount of sense of self to be able to withstand everything that's coming at you.
Oh, yeah. I would agree. I always describe, when I took the top job, it felt like, putting a 120-pound rucksack on and never taking it off. Really heavy.
So
Before I throw it back over to Jim, just a quick reminder to everybody, we're enjoying our discussion with Sabina today, of course, because of our wonderful sponsor, Darley. The military, our U.S. military, uses equipment manufactured by this great company, and it's a family-owned business in the Midwest. And their name is Darley. And there's some great people there doing wonderful work around the globe, and you can learn more about them at darley.com. That's DARLEY.com.
Yeah, such good people over there. Sabina, I've kind of got a question that, we talk about people being, as leaders, approachable. And it used to be when everyone was in the same office building back in the day, and big campuses, it was like, I've got an open door policy, and we'd welcome people in, and that's how we kind of demonstrated we were approachable. Or you walked around the office and chatted with people. And I don't even want to get into the remote versus on-premise work. I mean, big companies have dealt with this for a long time, where you might have had a team that was distributed all across the nation, even back in the 90s or 80s or something like that. What advice do you have for people to say, like, listen, I need to, and people have bigger teams than they used to. They used to be like, yeah, 10 or 12 people tops. Now it's like you got 40 or 50 people, so herding cats requires some authority. At the same time, you want to be approachable, and our calendars are full, and it makes it hard to find time. What are the best practices for your top executives that you advise to say, how can you keep that conduit open for two-way dialogue rather than one-way directives?
Again, such a great question. One way is to first model vulnerability and openness through yourself. How comfortable are you in your own skin? Are you willing to share certain things? And this is not about just vomiting out every detail of your personal life, but if you're struggling with something, is it okay to say, having a tough day today? I had some, my cat got or had a surgery. Instead of trying to paint a sunshine smile on everything, and that's where that toxic positivity term comes up. And I heard that come up a lot more during COVID because people were faced with such unusual circumstances. And instead of saying, gosh, I get it, this is really hard, people were like, we're resilient, we're going to get through this. While that might be true, it really discounted other people's feelings. So if you're like that, if you're shielded from your own emotions and disconnected from them, nobody else feels they have permission to feel what they're feeling or state their true sentiments on topics. So the more open you can channel yourself as, the more it gives people permission to come to you and connect with you human to human. Yeah. The challenge is that everything you say can be misconstrued or different stories can be made up. But what I tell my executives that I coach is be mindful of how you do that openness. And would you rather they're going to make up stories about you regardless, whether you say something or you don't. Would you rather they make up stories about what you say or stories about what they imagine you're going to say, but are not saying? So you do have to be mindful in how you say things, but being open allows others to do that. It sets the culture right then and there.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I know that you talked about earlier about like putting 2 hours a week to kind of just like do nothing, which I think is fantastic. I think we need more of that. But one of the issues that I've seen with so many people these days is like the back to back to back to back meetings with no time. I find it almost comical when I'm working with people to just say, all right, you've got all your people and their days are blocked out entirely in meetings, talking about the things they need to do. When do they do it?
Right.
How are you working with executives on that whole thing of like, hey, it's great to have meetings and it's so easy to set up meetings now, but like giving people the time and space to actually do something?
Right. There are three things. One is using a tool called a time portfolio, which is really stepping back and saying, what are the big buckets of space in which I use my time? Kind of like a money portfolio or anything else. What are those buckets? What percentage of time do I spend there? For example, I might have email and communications as a bucket, managing my team, paying the tax to my manager, attending their staff meetings and whatever else I have to do. Maybe it's some hands-on work that I have to do. Maybe there's some external presence, speaking at conferences and so on. So I look at that percentage in the time portfolio. And then I start to think about, well, what is the ideal mix? Then create an intermediate step. So let's say your email is at 35%, you want to get it to 20%. A key mistake would be to go from 35 to 20. So instead, if it's at 35, how can I go from 35 to 33%? Well, maybe I can turn off notifications. And something like that. So really being strategic about your time and declaring a war on the meetings that you don't need to attend as a result of first looking at that big picture and looking at that allocation of time. I know I mentioned 2 hours a week, but I'm also a huge fan of micro habits. And micro habits is just start as small as possible, ridiculously small, so small that it would be embarrassing for you to say you couldn't do it. And do it every day. Back-to-back meetings and managing your energy would be one example of that. What if, first of all, would be great if you could have your meetings all start at 5 minutes after the hour, which many people are doing these days. And instead of using those 5 minutes to go, oh, let me check my email, what happened? Let me check Teams, what messages came in. What if you first stood up, pumped out one jumping jack, and sat down? Just one.
Mhm.
Now, that sounds ridiculously small, so you're more likely to do it. I certainly do that. So that's a way of managing your energy with that. In terms of meetings, I was just talking to somebody who has moved from a big organization to not quite a startup, but close to a startup. And they're bringing in a lot of meetings because they had all these layers of people who needed to be informed about things. Well, here, the people who are in the meeting, as you're saying, are also the people doing the work. So how do you carve out some sacred time in the organization? Hey, no meetings between 8 and 10, or no meetings on Fridays, or whatever it might be, so that everybody is on a uniform meeting curfew time, to preserve that as work time.
Sabina, I wanted to shift gears a little bit, and I wanted to ask you what might be a touchy topic. We know people are overwhelmed. We know they're busy. My favorite podcast right now to date was, oh gosh, I think it was a year and a half ago. It was on Freakonomics, and it was, why are there so many bad bosses? And I'm wondering, part of it is, what they came to the conclusion in that podcast was, there's a bunch of individual contributors that should have never gone into management. And I'm wondering what you say on that, how hey, am I going through normal struggles? Should I, suck it up and really try to get better? Should I turn down a promotion? Or, hey, I'm over my head, I should quit. I mean, I'm wondering, because I'll bet you there's a bunch of people listening right now that probably would not describe their job right now as, joy.
And are you talking about specifically bosses or
I'm
anybody?
talking about people that are in those
In that
boss
role.
roles.
In
Yeah.
boss rules. Yeah. So first of all, I would say there is no such thing as a purely bad or purely good boss. They all reside in the same person. Just like none of us could, the three of us could claim we're wonderful human beings or we're completely evil human beings. I mean, there might be one or two exceptions in history, but by and large, it's not bad bosses, it's bad behaviors forged under pressure. And therefore, it becomes a solvable problem. In my years of executive coaching, there has been one person who said, Sabina, this boss thing is just not for me. I shared the feedback from the 360s. It was daunting. It was terrible. It was definitely one of the worst 360s. And they said, I'm going to go raise horses instead. And I thought, yeah, that's a good thing. So for the others, when you're wondering, should I remain, should I stay, or should I go as a boss? It's more, what do I need to do to adjust my expectations, this new space that I'm in as a boss or as a more senior boss? Because getting promoted, either to a boss level or a higher level boss, is sometimes one of the most dangerous times in your career. One of the most dangerous times in your career. It's great. It's cause for celebration. But once the bubblies settle down, what you might realize is that your strengths, and you were talking about individual contributors, your strengths will look very different. You didn't change, your position changed. And now the next that are craning up are going to have a much less charitable view of those very strengths. So one of the things, if you're struggling, is to say, actually start with your strengths. What are my strengths? And how might they be looking from the perspective of this project manager, from my administrative assistant, from this person, from that person? Let's say you have a strength of being strategic. it might start to look like you're manipulative. You are calm, people are going to say you're disinterested. You're passionate, people are going to say you're too emotional. All these meanings that you don't intend get layered in. In fact, these are things that served you well.
Yeah.
So for me, it's rarely about walking away. It's more about diagnosing which specific aspect of bad boss behaviors are coming out in you when the inevitable pressure comes in to corrupt you.
But it goes back to, you can't do any of that if you are not self-aware.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And willing to read the signs, willing to understand how others are seeing you.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's key.
This is good stuff. So you've been coaching a long time and you've been helping people, and you just highlighted a situation where someone, took the step and said, listen, leadership isn't for me, and stepped away from it all. In some degrees, that's a great success, but in some degrees, it's maybe not, the one you want to highlight out of all the work you've done. Is there a story of something you've helped someone accomplish, or something you've done, or something you've observed that is, might resonate with our listeners?
Mhm. Well, there's a story of this woman who, again, off the chart smart. And when I interviewed people, particularly the head of this one department who had recently been reorged under her, just could not stand her. She's a bully. She's a bull in a china shop. She knows best. She comes into meetings with her mind made up. She comes in with a first draft that's not really a draft, seemingly seeking our input, but she's so fast, she's gone ahead. We started talking, and she confessed that she wasn't great at dealing with B and C players. When there were A players, she was great. We're jamming together, we're moving fast, we're creating magic. And I said, with the law of numbers, you're not going to have purely A players, even if you handpick every single one. So it is not about working with A players. It's about bringing out the A game in your B and C players. This is a message that really resonated for her finally. And so we started working on how might she do that. She exercised her shut up muscle, first of all. She started taking what I call margin notes. That is, you've got your notes, and then you take your own ideas, your brilliant ideas that you're convinced are right and better than everybody else's. You simply just write them in the margin and wait to see what everyone else brings up first. She started looking for things that she genuinely appreciated in the perspectives that other people brought up. She also gave herself a task that once a meeting, she would play back, she would paraphrase what someone else said. So they knew that she was making an effort to try and understand. And by the way, that task also helped slow her down a little bit, so she could be at a similar cadence and pace to other people. What do you know? 3 months later, the head of that department told her she was the best boss he had ever had. And they had started off like this, completely butting heads, not ready to walk out the door. Well, why do you say that? Why do you say that I'm the best boss you've ever had? And he said, I feel appreciated. I feel smart when I leave the room. So the big transformation for her was from being the smartest person in the room and wanting to be seen as the smartest person in the room, to allowing everybody else to leave the room feeling they were the smartest person in the room, whether they were B players, C players, or A players.
No, I like that, bringing out the A game in your B and C players. I think that's a lovely story. Let me ask you a quick question about that story. Whose idea was it for this person to get coaching? Was that thrust upon them, or was that something they sought out?
It was a dual dance, if you will. So the manager of the person, the CEO, had started to receive a lot of complaints about this person. And so the HR person of the CEO said, well, there's this thing called executive coaching. Why don't we look into that? And they talked to me, and I said, I don't take on clients where coaching is thrust upon them as a bitter pill to swallow. This person needs to be interested in working with a coach, and they need to be coachable. Because if you're also trying to check a box saying, oh, we did everything and now we're going to wash our hands of this person, I am not the exit strategy for somebody. So they went and talked to her, and she said, yeah, absolutely, I want to continue to improve and grow. Our first exploratory conversation, I said, I've heard that you're super smart. Are you coachable? Are you going to, come in thinking you know it all? Where are we in that journey? And what I heard worked for me. Firstly, the chemistry worked, and I saw a level of curiosity that I sometimes don't see in people that I don't want to work with.
Yeah, that's great. I just, little note for anyone listening today, is seek it. If you think you need it, or if you think you could benefit for it, don't wait for someone to tell you. Seek it, and it's out there. And that's actually what we're looking for too. All three of us, I think I could speak for. So with that said, Jan, your show.
Yeah. So Sabina, as we kind of close out today, I'm looking at your book, and toward the end of the book, you've got a chapter called 360 Yourself to Stay on Track. I'm wondering if that's part of a closing thought for our listeners, if you've got something else you'd like to make sure people know.
For sure. Yeah, that's a great. So yes, of course, seek coaching, and you can spend thousands and thousands of dollars in coaching, or you can buy a $30 book and go to that segment called 360 Yourself, which is 42 questions that helps you diagnose which power gaps and pressure pitfalls you are most likely to get subsumed by. Now, if you're thinking, I don't want to read a book, I don't want to answer 42 questions, here are just a small handful of questions.
Okay.
Are people treating you as though you're funnier, smarter, and faster than you are? Are people, going back to my earlier point, coming up with ideas, or you're the only one? Are they arguing and showing counter sides to your ideas? These are just a few questions to get you started. Do you find that you're the only one who comes up with ideas for the meeting agenda, the follow-up, and even how the dishwasher should be loaded? That would be one of the pressure pitfalls that you want to watch out for. So these are just like 4 questions that you can ask yourself as an early diagnostic to understand where you should be paying attention.
Yeah, I like that. I remember, I was never a general, but I remember talking to some of my friends that were generals, and one of the first things they would do is bring them in a room and say, just so you know, you did not get funnier, you did not get smarter, you did not get better looking.
Beautiful.
Yeah. So, yeah, that's awesome. That's incredible. Well, it's really been, the time has flown by. We've really enjoyed having you on the show, and like you said, I really hope people go out and purchase your book.
Thank you so much.
No, Sabina, thank you again. For our listeners, it's all we have for you this week. We'll include ways for you to connect with Sabina in our show notes, so make sure to visit us at theleadershippodcast.com. And I think we're going to end on this one today. Socrates, know thyself.
Thanks for listening to the Leadership Podcast. To listen to more shows or to access the books and content discussed on this show, be sure to visit theleadershippodcast.com. The material in this podcast is copyright by Rafti Advisors and Self-Reliant Leadership and must have written approval before commercial application.